In this tutorial, I'm going to take you through a scenario that comes up a lot with model-driven apps, which is where you need people who aren't licensed with Dataverse, they don't have that premium Power Apps license, to be able to submit a form and have that data go into Dataverse. Now, this is not at all about subverting or working around the licensing model. This is a legitimate way of coming up with a solution for the right kinds of use cases, and we're going to go through what those are and how you can achieve this. I'm starting here with the Innovation Challenge model-driven app, which is one of the sample apps that comes with the platform. It's a nice, easy one to demo with. Concept here is that we have data tables in here for a challenge or a big initiative, and then we're getting people to submit ideas for them. Now, if you're on the receiving end of the ideas and helping to work them through a process, there's a lot going on of value in this model-driven app. You've got information about the challenge, you're scoring them, you're managing different team members and where it's up to and budgets and all of those things. But what about the people who just want to submit an idea? This is a classic case where you might have a handful of people in administrative roles who do need to manage that process, but you might have 500 or 1,000 people who you want to invite to submit ideas, and they don't actually need access to this app. You want them just to be able to put their ideas in and move on. Or you might even have external people. Perhaps you're working with across your whole building and you want those people to be able to submit ideas for things that might make everyone happy and they're not even in your organization. So what I'm going to go through here is showing you how we can use Microsoft Forms as the place where people can submit. And that means that the people who are actually submitting those ideas don't need to be licensed. That's just a public facing form. The data will come in here and the people who are actually receiving that and working in the app will be the licensed users. I'm going to take you through 4 different levels here, and we're going to get a little bit more sophisticated with each level. So follow me along for all of the things you can do here, or just jump out at level 1 if you've found what you need to do. Choose your own adventure. So first thing is going to be a very basic form submission that just creates a row in this ideas table, done and dusted. The next thing we're going to do is step it up a notch, because this ideas table is actually related to the challenges table in here. Each idea has a parent challenge, so we're going to have it that the form comes in, creates the idea and connects it to that challenge table. It's pretty cool, actually. Then what we're going to do is have a look at the idea of, we've got form submissions coming from external people. We don't know them, we don't have them in the database at all, but maybe we want to create a record of that person as a contact and then their idea related not just to the challenge but also to that person. So we're going to do that. And finally, we're going to have a look at how we can work with this for an internal scenario where not everyone is a licensed user of the app, but they are in your Azure Active Directory, now known as Microsoft Entra ID. So we're going to connect into that table within the Microsoft 365 world and be able to pull those details out. Let's get started here with the basic form scenario first. I'm going to start by creating a really basic form here in Microsoft Forms. If you know how to do this, just jump ahead to the next chapter. But in case you don't, from forms.office.com, this is part of your Microsoft 365 license. We're going to click on New Form. You give it a name. So I'm going to call this one just Ideas Demo. Just call it Ideas if you're playing along at home. And then what I'm going to do is add a series of text fields in here. So what I'm going to do first is we're going to work with the idea of somebody filling in their name and putting the stuff in. So we're going to ask them for their first name. And then what we do is add another text field, last name. This is honestly one of the simplest user interfaces to use. Another one here, which is your email address. Now, there are some options in here to change the formatting of things. We're just going to leave all this as text. It works much better when we're mapping things across into Dataverse, that we're just bringing stuff across as text. First name, last name, email address, your idea name. And then one final thing here, which is the description of your idea. And you can choose that to be a long answer so that you're allowing people to put more things in. You can actually toggle this required switch on for any of those things that you want to do. And then when you're done, it's automatically saved. Now I'm just going to close this tab down and work with the one that I've prepared earlier, which is exactly the same thing. You do have some options in here when you go into this box here that says collect responses. This is your choice about whether this is going to be a public facing form or an internal only facing form, and we're going to show both here. So for now I'm going to put it on this option here, anyone can respond. And then you have your URL there. You can shorten the URL, you can create a QR code, however you want to be distributing it. But essentially, if you just copy that link, you can share that with people who in your organization or outside of your organization here, because this is for anyone, and they will get a version of the form that looks like this. If you don't like the out-of-the-box color scheme, you can also click on the style button and have a play around there with your colors, but I quite like this one, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. And now we need to work with Power Automate as a trigger and action workflow tool that's going to have, when that form is submitted, create a row in Dataverse. Now I'm working here in my demo environment. Make sure that you click on there. If you've got multiple environments in here, make sure you're in the right one. Wherever your model-driven app is created, you need to be in the same one. Otherwise, you're going to get a little way into this and not have such a good experience. Let's give Copilot a go here and see how we go. I find this is a nice, it's not doing everything just yet, but it's a nice shortcut to get started. So I can say something like, when a form is submitted, create a new row in Dataverse. Now this is actually going to take some of the legwork out of it for me in just setting up some of those initial steps, including this one here, which I will take you through, but is not always immediately obvious if you haven't done this before. You will be prompted to authenticate and sign in if you haven't already used these connectors, and then we just click on Create Flow. Now I'm going to take you through these steps in case you're doing it all manually and so you understand what's going on, because as much as Copilot's giving us a nice shortcut here, I do actually want you to understand the concept. So the first thing is when a new response is submitted. So that's our trigger. When someone comes in and clicks the submit button on this form, what we want to do is create that row. So the first thing we need to do over here is to say which form is it. So I'm just going to pick that ideas form. You'll see those other ones I was starting to create earlier are popping up in there, but I've got that one just called ideas. The next thing that you might not think of, but this is part of the way Flow works, so a core concept here, if you haven't used Power Automate before, is that you need to use these actions that are called get something or list something. We're going to be looking at quite a few of these examples because it makes the flow, the rest of the steps in the flow, aware of what's going on. So when a form response is submitted, okay, that's its trigger, it knows what to do, but we actually want to pull data out of that form response, the actual information that people have filled in. And in order for Power Automate to be able to do that, we need to tell it to effectively go and say, okay, the form has been submitted, but we need you to go and actually get those details. So that's what this step is doing. Seems a little bit repetitive, but once you get that concept of the get and the list in your head, it makes sense. So again, we just need to choose which form, which is the one from the previous step. This response ID has come through already. Copilot has helped us with that, but we're basically saying it's the unique value of that previous step. All good. So then what we need to do is say add a new row, and this isn't particularly helpful. Let's just get rid of all of this. The Copilot doesn't really get us very far there, but we've got that Dataverse connector. So we're going to say that we're going to create a new row in the ideas table. We'll give it a second to come through. Now, the first thing that's happened here is that we've got the name with the asterisk. If I go back into my Dataverse table, my model-driven apps here, name is there. That's the main header, if you like, and that is mandatory. So this is actually adhering to anything that's in the Dataverse table for those requirements. So what happens now is we're going to click on this little power icon, I guess. We click on that, and this is now showing us all of the bits of information that are available from the flow. So what happens here is we've got this get response details, and you can see these are all of the things that have come through from that form. So we had the first name, last name, email, description. There's also a couple of other things in here. We're going to come back to this in the fourth scenario, so stick around, responders email, when we work with the internal one, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The name of the idea here is this one here, idea name. So all I need to do is click on that and it's popped it in. Now it's popped in some other things here. I don't actually really know what these are. It's tried to be helpful, but let's just clear those away and do the right thing that we want to do. I'm also going to bring in, I've got the first name, last name, and email address of the person who is submitting the idea, what I'll do here is just switch across to a different version of the form that I'm using. I've mocked up a few extra fields on this demo app. So this is what I'm bringing in here. We've got the name, the description, first name, last name, and email address. We're going to come back to these other ones in the more complex scenarios. Go back into Power Automate here. So I want email, first name, last name, and that's it for now. So it brings those things through, and I'm just going to go through exactly this same process. So we click on that little icon there. So this one is email. So we just click that. First name is obviously first name, and last name is last name. Now I'm just seeing these things here, but you can actually search. If you've got a lot of things going on and it gets too hard to find, you can type it in and it makes it a fair bit easier to find. All right, that's it. That's our first level 1 flow. So let's save that one. We've got this name up here. When a form is submitted, create a new row in Dataverse. That's basically based off the Copilot description that I put in, but that was nice and simple. Let's give it a test run, shall we? I'm just going to go ahead and run it because I'm fairly confident I've got this one right. So we're going to click here on preview if you want to test it, or you can grab that link and go into a private browser and put it in there. So we're going to put in a person's name here. We'll go Harry Smith. Your email, harry@demo.com. This is obviously not a real person. The idea name here is going to be longer lunch breaks. We should all get 90 minutes for lunch. I'm going to have a little fun with this. And then Harry is going to submit that. All right. Now, if this has worked, we will see a couple of things happen here. First of all, I'm going to go back a level in my flow, and I do love the green succeeded button, so we can see that that's actually worked. And if I go into my app here, I'm going to click on the ideas table, and there it is at the top of my list. I've got this sorted by most recent, longer lunch breaks, and there's all the information that's come through on the form. Except that I've missed description, haven't I? So let's go back into the flow here and edit that. Come in here, email first name. Were you shouting at the camera saying, Lisa, you missed description? Someone should have. Maybe you did. Let's fix this up. This is a good way to show you how to fix up something that you've missed. So we're just going to come in here. We'll click description. No drama. Little lightning icon, we'll get the description in there and save it. Now, if you want to rerun that flow, because honestly, I don't really need to fill out another form here, we can actually just come in and click through on this, and then we've got a resubmit button. Yes, thank you. I will run that one again. That will actually duplicate the record, but that's okay. Come back into ideas, and there it is a second time. So we'll go into the second one there, and there we go. Now we've got our name, description, first name, last name, Harry. Easy, right? So if you've got a really simple scenario where you've just got a form and you want it to land in a single Dataverse table, you're done. Thanks for watching, but I'm going to show you some other cool things now, because what we want to do, we've got the challenge in here, we've got this return to office challenge, and we actually want to make it part of that. So let's say this form was specifically for that return to office challenge, and we want to link those things up in there. What we're going to do here is modify our flow with a couple of steps. So I can just click on this edit button. If you haven't had to go through that, there's always an edit button somewhere up in the top here. Now, the way that we need to do this is to get the information into the flow about this return to office challenge. So what I'm going to do is add another step into my flow before the add a new row step that gets the details of that particular challenge table that we're looking for. So we come in here and add an action. This is a Microsoft Dataverse action. Now, it's very tempting to think it's the get a row by ID. That is useful in some circumstances. We're going to have a look at one of those a little bit later. But actually what we want to do is use something here called list rows. So the difference between get a row and list rows, get a row is where you know the ID number. List rows is where you want to do a search to find one or more rows that meet criteria. So what I'm doing here is going to put in an action that says list the row, find the row that's called return to office. Now, you can actually grab the ID from somewhere, but I'm going to show you the way that's actually a more useful skill. So list rows here. The table name, I am looking for the challenge table, so we find that in there. And then what I want to do is come in here, and this is a little bit different now because before what I was doing was here's the table and here are fields on the table. I want to be able to do a couple of things. So the first thing is that I want to filter my list by that name. And the second thing is that I only want it to return one value. The first one it finds, I've got my challenges in here as unique values. So I don't want it to, if I have a lot of challenges in there and I don't put that one in there, it's going to do a lot more work. This reduces the amount of sort of load on the system. So this is an OData type expression. This is where we get a little bit into a type of we're not really going to call this code, but you do have to know what you're doing. So there's a couple of things in here that I've just learnt along the way. Just make a note of how these go. So what we need to do here is we're filtering by the name column. So what I'm going to do is go into my solution and have a look at the challenge table and find that primary name column. What you need to find is the thing here that's called the logical name. That's what we're always going to use in Power Automate. So I'm just going to grab that, Control C to copy it, back across in here and pop it in there. So that's the underlying logical name that it's looking for. And then the formula uses this EQ, which is equals. And then we put a single quotation mark twice, and I'm going to backspace so that I'm sitting in the middle. So I'm putting something in the middle here that's got a single quotation mark either side. And what I'm looking for is this return to office. And I'm going to type it exactly as it is. So return to office. So you'll see there, single quote either side of it. And then I want to find just one. All right. So now what we've got, when the response comes in, get the details, list through all of those challenges to find one that is called that. And now what we want to do is modify our add a new row box to link it to this. This is the lookup, this originating challenge on my idea is here. Originating challenge. This is the lookup that we're working with. So we select that, it'll appear in here. And what I'm going to do here is, again, this is just a formula that you need to know. What we need to do with this, when you're working with a lookup in Dataverse, you need to do a very specific thing. The first thing is you need to put the name of the table, that logical name of the table, in plural. What can I say? So we're going to come back in here. This is the challenge table. So we go back to the table level, click on properties and advanced options. And here's the logical name here, sample underscore challenge. We're going to copy that, take it back in here, put it in, and then make it plural. So anytime you've got an ID number and you want to link it, populate a lookup in a Dataverse table, this is what you have to do. The underlying logical name, plural, and then we're going to do open bracket, close bracket, or parentheses. Again, backspace into the middle of it. And now we're going to put in the unique ID of the one we want. And the flow knows the unique ID because it found it in this step here. So we click on the lightning. You'll see we've got this list rows. We should actually rename these. I'll come back to that in a minute. And what I'm going to do here is find, if you start to type the name of the table, it will prompt you with this one here, unique identifier. That's the one you want. That's actually also known as a GUID. It's a great big long stretch of characters. You actually can also grab it. This is the shortcut that I'm not showing you, but you could actually cheat a little bit and do this. In the URL, if you go to the record, you'll see challenge and ID equals. That's the number there. So that's a unique ID number for that if you ever need to actually get to it. So you could just hard code that in if you preferred, but I'm here to teach you. I'm here to teach you the other skills. So what we've got now is all of that in there, and you'll see that it's added a for each. Because I've used list rows here, it is actually assuming that it might get more than one response, and it's going to multiply. It's going to do that more than one time. I know that it's only going to have one result, so the for each here is largely harmless and useless, but it is what it is in the formula. Okay, let's save that and see how we go. We're going to go, I'll show you how to do a test this time actually, because this one is worth doing. So if I come in here and say, let's do a test, I'm going to manually submit a test. What happens now is it's waiting to see if it works. So you don't have to do this step. You saw last time I didn't do that, but if you want to troubleshoot, I quite like doing this. So let's submit another response. We'll put in a different good idea about bringing people back to the office. George Roberts George at demo.com. What is George's fictional idea? He is going to say that we should have a later start time. These people really don't want to work very hard, do they? Later start time. We should start at 9:30 to avoid traffic. None of these ideas are actually going to get approved. All right, and then fictional George is going to submit his absolutely fabulous idea there. We're going to come back in here and you'll see this catches up now, and you're going to love it when you get the ticks all the way down. That's a moment of happiness. And so now if I go back into my app, back into my ideas, there it is there, later start time. Now look at the difference. Look at this. So if I go back to my original one here, remember, we just had that submitted, but it wasn't linked to a challenge, whereas this one has come through. Let's click back into it with all of those details, and it's linked into that challenge. All right, are you ready for the next level? We're going to get into now linking up the people. So I'll first show you, let's say we wanted to create an actual contact record for George in the system linked to the idea as well. And then I'm going to show you if George was actually an internal user, which is my favorite one. So again, just to reinforce all of these things as we're doing these next two scenarios, these are not ways of giving people access to the app without licensing. It's giving people the ability to just submit a piece of data and walk on. They don't need to be licensed because they're not actually ever accessing Dataverse. You will need an administrator or someone who's building the flow for all of these scenarios to actually have that premium license, because this is using Dataverse, which is a premium connector. But the people who are just filling out that form and not interacting with the data, they're fine. That's all good. All right, let's go here and step it up another level now. I'm going to come back into clicking on edit. So I'm going to do something else here, which is to create a contact record. So I'm going to do something else about here. So we've got the responses come in, I'm getting the details. I'm going to add another step in here, another action, a Dataverse action. And this time I'm going to add a new row. So we saw that add a new row before when we were looking at creating that ideas table, but this time I am actually going to create a contact table. Now this is a out-of-the-box table in Dataverse. It's got a lot. All we want to do is put in first name, last name, email. Obviously, if you're collecting other details off the form, you could do that. Last name is a mandatory field. Click on the little power icon there. There we go, your last name. And we have got the email in there. So we'll put the email in there, and the first name is the first name. Now, you'll see this is starting to get a little bit bad in the naming, right? We've got add a new row, list rows. As it starts to work through, that's not very helpful. So if I come in here, at the top here, you can actually change the name of it. So this is going to be add a contact row, record. List rows is about find the return to office challenge. So the more that you give these sensible names that make sense, and again for this one, this is well, let's call it the right language, add an idea row. Okay. So then what happens as you're going through these things and clicking on stuff, you will see then that you're getting the more useful names in there as we work through it. It just makes it a whole lot easier to see what's going on and for anyone else to see what you've done. So now what we've got is we've added our contact row. Let me just check. Last name, email, first name, all good. Everything else is good. But now what we want to do is in my idea row, if I come back into here, you'll see that I've got submitted by contact. So I've configured another lookup in here because I want that to be a link to a contact record rather than just have the first name, last name in there. So this is great if you've got external people who aren't otherwise in your Entra ID. Where am I at? Okay, so now what we want to do is come in here and find submitted by contact. Awesome. Getting the hang of this. There we go. So you'll see now we've got add a contact row. It's a bit easier to find. What I want is that unique contact we just created. So remember, when you want to find an ID, just type the name of the table. We typed contact, unique identifier of the contact. That's it. Now, what have I done wrong? I always forget this. Whenever I am populating a lookup, which is what I'm doing here, you need to put this extra piece in here. Now, the contact table, if we come back into it, is actually, let's go back out of my solution and just into the tables here, and I'll just show you where I'm finding this. The contact table is actually just called contacts. It's nice and easy. It's an out-of-the-box table, doesn't even have any prefix, so there it is there, all lowercase, contact. So we need to come in here and go contact, plural, contacts, and then put those parentheses around the ID. Always that with a lookup. Okay, save. Let's test it, and I'm actually just going to test it with the last form. So this is where the test can help you not having to redo forms over and over again. I can use a recently used trigger and just use that same one again. So that's going to duplicate the same response rather than having to fill out the form. Come on, ticks. Yes, okay, good. Of course I knew it was going to work. It definitely always works the first time, every time I do this. All right, here we go. Click on that. Later start time. We should start at 9:30 to avoid traffic. Return to office. Haha, George Roberts. Now, realistically, I would actually change this around in my creating that row to remove the first name, last name, email addresses from that flow and also from the form, because you actually don't need them there. You would just have this submitted by contact. You can use a quick view if you want to be able to, just see more details about George. But let's click through to George. He is now in the contacts table with the details that he submitted on the form. How cool is that? All right, final level. Are you ready? Are you up for the challenge? Internal use case. And this is one that comes up a lot. So this is where you've got a lot of employees. You're asking your employees to submit ideas, but the vast majority of employees don't actually need or want access to this app. So what I will do here, I'm going to come in here, first of all, and change the restriction on my form. So if I change this, we're going to remove the first name. There's method here. Remove the last name. Remove the email address. And now I've just got an ID, name, and description. Why are you doing that, Lisa? Very good question. If we go to collect responses, now it's got my name on it. This is just I've got a tenant that I've used in my name. So this is pretend that's your organization name in there. Only people in your organization can respond. Sign in is required to validate. So what happens now, if I go and copy that link, and I'm just going to grab an in private window and paste that in there, it will actually say that you have to sign into your account in order to access the form. So now we've created not a public-facing form to anyone to use, but a secure form for only people in your organization to use that doesn't require them to have Power Apps licenses. Let me switch across here to a tab where I am logging in as another user in my organization here. We're going to paste this in. And on this browser, I am actually logged in with my work account here, and that's allowed me to come through. So we're just going to park that for a second, and we're going to build out the flow that goes with this one. I'm actually going to start from scratch here because it is quite different and I don't want to get this one too confused. So we're going to call this form to Dataverse from external contact, and we will go back in here and back to my home, and this time I'm going to say when a form is submitted, we'll just use the same prompt, get that shortcut again and create the flow. And I'm going to call this one form to Dataverse for an internal user. When a new response is submitted, this is the same thing we did before. The ideas form, we're getting the response details from the ideas form, and we are adding a new row into the ideas table. You do actually have to get rid of that. It's mildly frustrating. Ideas. All right. So we're going to do the same thing. Firstly, the idea comes in with the idea name. We are going to bring in the description, but that's all that's on the form, remember, this time. So we'll map it to description. How, might you ask, are we going to find people? Within Dataverse, you've actually got the contact table is a great place for storing customers or external people that you work with, but there's a couple of other tables in here. There's one in here called user that you can use for various things, but user is only licensed users of the app. So that's actually not going to be helpful here, because if they were licensed users, you would possibly have a Canvas app built on top of this and you wouldn't be using Microsoft Forms necessarily to do it. So the other table we've got in here is one called, let's click on all, Microsoft Entra ID. So this used to be called the AAD users table, Azure Active Directory users table. It's been renamed, but it's the same thing. This is a virtual table that is connected to your Azure Active Directory. So these people are not licensed users, but they're people in your organization who are part of the organization. And so therefore the Microsoft 365 and the Azure Active Directory actually knows who they are. So we're going to use that connector here in order to get the details. So the first thing we're going to do is, when we've got the response details, we're going to add another action in here, and we're going to use this connection here, which is the Office 365 users connection. What this has is an option called Get User Profile, and all it needs is one unique ID to identify the user, and that unique ID can be the email address. So if I click on this little lightning bolt here, in the Get Response Details, you've got various things. We've got the ID name and description, but because we've set this now that it's something where people are logging in, it's actually going to record their email address. They don't have to type it in. They've already authenticated and logged in. Microsoft Forms knows who they are, internal use, and then you don't have to ask for that detail and it just comes through, and then it can grab their user profile from Entra ID. Cool, right? So now all we need to do is this other step, and hopefully we'll get it right this time. I'll remember to put the table name in. So we're going to change this to say add an idea row. And then in addition to, we've got the idea name and the description. I'm not going to rebuild the bit where we're connecting up to the challenge table. You could repeat that or change the other one if you want to do that. I just want to show you this different thing here. We come in here and I'm going to find this one here, submitted by. So this one is actually when I've configured this in my table here. This one is actually a lookup to the contact table. This one is a lookup to Microsoft Entra ID. So I've created that lookup not to the user table, to the Microsoft Entra ID table. So again, distinction, the Entra ID table is everyone who is in that Active Directory in Entra ID, whereas users is only the licensed users in Dataverse. So they're both useful. This one is a virtual table and has some limitations, but for this scenario, it works just beautifully. So back in Power Automate here, submitted by. Remember, tell me, what do we have to do? It's the table name in plural. This one is called AAD user because that's its old name and its schema name under the hood doesn't change. Plural, yes. Open and close my parentheses, and now I'm going to grab the ID that came from this step here. So we open this up. We've got all of these things in here, and I'm just going to search for ID, and I'm going to get that unique ID of the user. When a form is submitted, get all the details from the form, get the detail of the person from Entra ID based on their email address that they logged in with, and add that in and do the lookup in there. Let's see this in action now. So I'm coming in to this browser window where I'm logged in. This is with my account. I am going to put in my idea now. This is in my name, so maybe I should come up with something a little bit more sensible. How about we have Thursday lunch and learn. Let's have a guest presenter sharing a topic each week. All right. Now I haven't had to put in any of my details. Submitted. Lovely, all good. Let's come back in and see what happened here. I'm going to go back into my app, into my ideas, and there's my Thursday lunch and learn. Now I didn't turn off the previous flow, so that's the one that has linked it up to the challenge, but this is the one that's just been created here. So look at that, submitted by, and that is actually a link to that Entra ID, which is that related table in the system. So if you have a scenario like this where all the users need to do is submit data into Dataverse, this is how you do it legitimately without getting into a licensing mess. If, however, you need people to have access to the Dataverse tables at all, they're going to need a license. If you need them to be able to maybe see the list of ideas they submitted and update them, that's something you can actually do with Power Pages. That's a portal functionality that has a different licensing model. You can check out my video on that here if you'd like to learn more. And thanks for watching. Let me know any other questions or scenarios in the comments.